It's official. There's a new era in college football. Thanks for stopping by here at the Voice of College Football for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. And welcome to the new world order of college football. Players officially being paid, not by private donors, boosters, under the table, not by NIL exclusively or only, or collectives that work to collect money through corporations or private donors. No, this is official, revenue generated, pay for play. It's been agreed upon. Let's check out the details. And of course, I will provide my analysis. And Friday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, we will hear from you. Live call-in show. Comments and questions are invited as well. As reported by Dan Murphy and Pete Thamel at ESPN, the NCAA and its 5 power conferences have agreed to allow schools to directly pay players for the first time in the 100-plus year history of college sports. The NCAA and its leagues are moving forward with a multi-billion-dollar agreement to settle 3 pending federal antitrust cases. The NCAA will pay more than $2.7 billion in damages over 10 years to past and current athletes, sources told ESPN. Sources said the parties also have agreed to a revenue-sharing plan, allowing each school to share up to roughly $20 million per year with its athletes. That was reported earlier as 17 to 22 million, which is roughly about 22% of the average school's intercollegiate revenue. Quote, the 5 autonomy conferences and the NCAA agreeing to settlement terms is an important step in the continuing reform of college sports that will provide benefits to student athletes and provide clarity in college athletics across all divisions for years to come, says Charlie Baker, NCAA president. The settlement is also a roadmap for college sports leaders in Congress to ensure this uniquely American institution can continue to provide unmatched opportunity for millions of students. All Division I athletes dating back to 2016 are eligible to receive a share as part of the settlement class. I don't know why it's 2016. In exchange, athletes cannot sue the NCAA for other potential antitrust violations. Of course, that's a key component in this agreement, and must drop their complaints in 3 other open cases: House versus the NCAA, Hubbard versus the NCAA, and Carter versus the NCAA. Settlement terms must be approved by Judge Claudia Wilkin, who is presiding. The settlement terms must be approved by Judge Claudia Wilkin, who is presiding over all 3 cases. Revenue sharing should start in the fall of 2025. 13-page document, all approved by the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, and yes, there is still officially a Pac-12 and Notre Dame as well as a member in all the other sports of the ACC. Next, let's get to the comment by the Notre Dame president, because this is key in regards to the sustainability of college athletics as it was formerly functioning versus what it has to function under legislation and just the plain law in which the NCAA has violated for years. Quote, the settlement, though undesirable in many respects and promising only temporary stability, is necessary to avoid what would be the bankruptcy of college athletics, Notre Dame President John I. Jenkins said. To save the great American institution of college sports, Congress must pass legislation that will preempt the current patchwork of state laws, establish that our athletes are not employees, but students seeking college degrees, and provide protection from further antitrust lawsuits that will allow colleges to make and enforce rules. Wilkins said something in there that is key to myself and many of you: the integrity of college athletics. Are these just hired hands that we're talking about going into the future? Just guys that show up and put on the gear of a school during practice and for games and otherwise have no connection to the university? They're basically just employees of the university, state employees, and they have no connection to the university. Let's remember a time way, way back at the origin of college athletics. College football is what we care about here, where college athletics, college football, was just an extension of the academic experience of the student athlete, where football just was something that you did after school. It was a practice and then play on Saturday event. And then if course, it gained more and more popularity. The crowds would gather. The TV then was instituted. And really, once TV was instituted and once there was a amount of money gained at the gate, the admission of these games, that superseded the amount of the cost of fielding a football team and traveling and tuition and everything involved, that's when it became a business. Now, how is this going to be palatable going forth in the future? For me, is that there is an assurance that although these are employees to a certain extent, although it was stated by Wilkin right there, not employees technically, let's say it is what it is, they're going to be paid rather well for working for the university as football players, that they are still student athletes, and therefore they still have to meet the requirements of a student athlete. Their major may be in football. That could be an official major going forward. You are majoring in football, and the success therein would be moving on to the NFL, and the failure would be failing to gain a job in the NFL. However, that happens with other scholarship students in which they have to take electives, right? They have to take elective courses outside of their major. Same with the football players. They got to go to class, got to take tests, write papers, pass tests, show up for class, do all those things that other students need to do, at least on the surface. Whether that flies everywhere and whether that is cheated against, I'm not here to speak against that. I'm here to say this is what needs to be instituted and enforced and confirmed about these student athletes going forward. The agreement does not resolve all the pending legal issues that have revolutionized the business of college sports and destabilized the multi-billion-dollar industry. Athletes and their advocates are still fighting to become employees or find other ways to collectively bargain in the future, which could reshape a revenue-sharing agreement. This week's agreement, though, potentially decreases the NCAA's exposure to antitrust litigation, which has been the most powerful tool in pushing schools to provide more for athletes. Steve Berman's the co-lead counsel for the athletes alongside veteran antitrust attorney Jeffrey Kessler, said this week's agreement feels like, quote, a finish line, but that the cases won't be officially closed for several more months. Other antitrust attorneys told ESPN that the deal could unravel if athletes opt out to join a separate and pending antitrust case, or if Wilkin rejects the settlement terms. Berman said he remains confident their deal will hold. We have seen throughout sports history, Major League Baseball being the best example, that if the players are educated, they understand the terms, they understand the circumstances, they understand their leverage, they have good leadership, they have strong direction and legal counsel, they can drive the ship, they can force the issues, they can rule the sport. That's what's happened many times in Major League Baseball in getting their way. Now, do college athletes still, will they be able to unify on a national scale? We've seen it in pockets where they've been able to push issues and been able to enact change. However, collectively, over the course of several sports or revenue sports or football only, but in a national way, will they be able to do that? I'm hugely proud, Berman said. This is a revolutionary change I never thought would happen when I started this. I don't really know why you start something if you think you're going to fail. I'm thrilled for the student athletes because this will be life-changing for all of them. By the end of this week, the parties plan to alert Wilkin, who has presided over the most impactful antitrust cases of the past decade, that they will submit final details to the court in the next 30 days. If Wilkin approves those details in a preliminary hearing, which is likely to occur in July, Berman said the plaintiff's lawyers will publish a website and distribute a notice to all players explaining the potential benefits of remaining in the class and options for objecting or opting out. So that's key right there that we didn't know just a minute ago. The terms and the agreement and all the facts and all that's involved is going to be laid out for the players. So there's going to be a formal presentation of this in which they can look it over. And that's going to present more of an opportunity to say, hey, you have this opportunity, you have this option to opt out. Class members usually have a window of more than 30 days to raise objections or opt out of a settlement. If players opt out, they will give up any money they would receive from the damages, but retain the right to sue the NCAA and its schools in the future for antitrust violations. There's at least one other pending antitrust lawsuit not covered by this week's agreement. Former Colorado football player Alex Fontenot is suing the NCAA for restricting how it shares TV rights revenue with players. The NCAA and the attorneys in the House case argue that Fontenot's claims should be consolidated with the other lawsuits because they are very similar. Players are going to be monitoring this decision closely because that's going to give a lean as to whether it's going to make sense to opt out. Berman said he believes the judge in Fontenot's case could change her opinion once the terms of the settlement are approved. He says it's unlikely many athletes will pass up the potential settlement money and take on the risk of joining Fontenot's case. This next paragraph answers a question that I've been asking for the last couple of weeks concerning payment, retroactive payment reparations to these players. Berman told ESPN that a series of formulas devised by a sports economist will be used to decide how to split the money in damages among the 10,000 former and current athletes. He said some money will be split evenly among all members, but other parts will be allocated based on the athlete's market value. Wow. Metrics such as career snap count or a player's star rating in recruiting might determine their payout. That is going to be complicated and, as it says here, a granular data process. Wow. Several athletic directors told ESPN that they are hopeful the settlement lays the groundwork for a system in which success on the field is less dependent on which schools can spend the most money. Okay, now we're getting to the point where we need to raise some questions. Because there are schools that generate more football money, obviously, even within the context of playing in the same conference under the same agreement as others. Let's take the SEC and its contract with the Disney/ESPN company. Of course, obviously, look at the TV ratings. Alabama, Georgia, and on down the line, we know the schools pretty much in order bring in the most revenue because they bring in the attention, the eyeballs, the streaming, all of it involved that create the most money. However, now we're in a system in which if players are being paid, does all this money go into one bucket to be distributed equally among all members? Florida State and Clemson are suing the ACC right now, partly because of unfair distribution, unequal distribution. Of course, they signed up for it, but it's unequal distribution among 14 schools, now 17, 14 schools that, of course, have different value, but the revenue is distributed equally. Well, that's not necessarily fair, but it's determined and it's been agreed upon in every conference. But now we've got a competitive situation. So it was competitive under the table before. Now it is competitive out in the open. And so you are competing against schools that have either more value or less value to the conference, and you are going to be given the same amount of money to pay players, and that is going to be the number one decider in the value of the players, the quality of players that you get. Of course, it's still going to be a decision based on the player assessing the coaching staff, the relationships, the NFL development, and of course, the chances of winning. All those things are still going to be determined along with an education by some. But number one on the list is going to be money because this is basically a quasi-job. It is a job in practice. In reality, it's a job even though they are still student athletes. So where are most of these athletes going to choose? They're going to go to the place that can pay them the most money. Well, if there are football programs that are of higher value, but they're receiving the same amount of money as they always have, but now it's a direct competitive basis and situation in which they are competing against the schools in their conference and across the country for the same players, and they're bringing in more revenue, how long is that going to last? How long is that going to last? And then number two, of course, is paying the players. How do you assess the value of the players? Based on tenure, based on statistics? We don't have statistics that really can evaluate fairly across the board. This is not basketball where everyone shoots and rebounds and passes and does the same skills. Same in baseball. Everybody hits, everybody fields, everybody throws. In football, trying to assess guard play versus linebacker play versus safety play versus quarterback play. How do you pay these players? How do you assess their value? Well, they've got a sports economist looking at the NIL situation in the back pay that's going back to 2016. I guess they could do the same for this, but man, to keep that type of business churning, per se, that accounting up is a nightmare. Or do you pay everyone the same? That's certainly not fair. I would try to involve both aspects. And I think for the school payout of revenue from the TV contracts, we now are going to go into a phase, an era. The next step in this involving the schools competing against each other is going to be something that we see in the NFL and Major League Baseball, in particular MLB, where part of the revenue, let's say 50%, just to make it simple, 50% of the revenue is divided equally. But the other 50% of the revenue is determined based on how successful are you? What are your TV ratings? And that is not necessarily an easy formula. It sounds like it is on the surface. Oh, you drew 10 million per game, you drew 1 million per game, you get 10 times more. Well, most likely that team that's drawing 10 million per game is in the prime windows on the big networks because it's a chicken before egg, egg before chicken scenario in which the best teams are selected for the best TV windows on the best networks. However, they also benefit from those time slots. So that's a complicated formula or estimation to make, but I cannot see the revenue distribution continuing into the future to be equal when the value of the schools and their football programs is nowhere close to being equal. Several athletic directors told ESPN that they are hopeful the settlement lays the groundwork for a system in which success on the field is less dependent on which schools can spend the most money. Sources said some of the challenges to solve include figuring out how to distribute the revenue sharing money in a way that meets market needs while complying with Title IX laws, and whether schools can regain control of the marketplace for college athletes, which has been outsourced during the past 3 years to booster collectives, which pay athletes via name, image, and likeness endorsement deals. Berman said the settlement includes, quote, mechanism that he believes will make it easier for schools to rein in the marketplace for third-party NIL deals. He declined to provide any further details. I think we have a chance right now to really reshape the model in the most meaningful way of any of our lifetimes, and maybe the most meaningful way there has ever been, said Whitman, the new Division I Council chair. Title IX could get a little messy based on the politics in our country, but I think it's pretty simple. If your sport generates revenue above beyond the expenses, net revenue, then the player should be paid, regardless of whether it's a male or female sport. If it does not, then the old system should be in play. Those scholarships are in play, and the players should be happy that they receive a scholarship and all the things included with the scholarship. But if the sport generates revenue above and beyond, if it's in the black, then you pay the players. And that might turn out to be, for some SEC baseball programs, $18 a month. Whatever it turns out to be, if it's in the black, you pay the players. If it's in the red, you don't pay the players. Seems pretty simple to me. Title IX, as I understand it, speaks solely to participation, the opportunity to participate in sports equally based on sex and gender. There we go. So much to uncover, so much to talk about here involving all of this. I have so many comments and questions to make beyond what I've made today, and you will get your chance on our Friday night show, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, right here at the Voice of College Football, taking your comments and questions and your calls. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. Please like and subscribe.